Good evening. I'm Helen Lewin, President of the National Council of Jewish Women of Victoria, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional lands of the Boon Wurrung and Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and to any elders present with us here tonight. It's my pleasure to welcome distinguished guests, members, and friends to the 2020 Fanny Reading Human Rights Lecture. We hold this annual lecture both to honour our founder and to promote awareness of human rights issues. We're delighted to still bring this event to life online for 2020. As most of you are already well aware, Fanny Reading is our founder and founded this organisation almost 100 years ago. She was born in Minsk, Russia in 1884 and migrated to Australia in 1889, settling her close-knit Orthodox Jewish family in Ballarat, Victoria, when she was just 4 years old. She moved to Melbourne in the early 1900s and became involved in Jewish youth activities, teaching Hebrew at the St Kilda Jewish congregation. And this was the beginning of her involvement in Jewish life and with Jewish organisations. With World War I creating new opportunities for women, she re-entered the University of Melbourne to study medicine in 1916. She graduated in 1922 at the age of 38. She proved that a Jewish woman in 1922 could enter, enrol and graduate from a prestigious Australian university as a doctor, when few Jewish women had done so. On graduation, she moved to Sydney, joining her brother's medical practice, and also established her own there. This was at a time, again, when female doctors in Australia were struggling to gain necessary consultancy experience to be able to start their own independent practices. In setting up her own, she chose to live and work in King's Cross because she wanted to tend to the poor, to the sick, and to the downtrodden. Maurice Ochett, a friend of Reading's, wrote that in her little apartment, her little apartment was a haven for abused prostitutes, street kids, beaten wives, and the homeless dregs of humanity who haunted the cross. At a grassroots level, Fanny Reading mobilised the Jewish women of Australia and became a significant Jewish leader focused on issues affecting women, the Jewish community, and the impact of Zionism. She showed that it was possible to be a single Orthodox Jewish woman, have a career, and live independently. She respected that other Orthodox Jewish women might follow the usual path of an Orthodox Jewish wife and mother, but she had the courage and the will to forge a different path for herself. But it is her role as a Jewish community leader that is her greatest legacy, primarily as a result of the formation of the National Council of Jewish Women of Australia and her support for Zionism. As a community leader, Fanny unified Jewish women across Australia into National Council so that they could contribute to the preservation and the continuation of her race. Fanny Reading passed away in 1974, and upon her death, the then National President of the National Council, Sylvia Gelman of blessed memory, wrote, "May the light that was Fanny Reading illuminate our paths for many years to come." She was posthumously honoured with a Centennial Anniversary Recognition Award for her outstanding contributions to medicine, founding Sydney's first women's general medical practice, and the founding of National Council of Jewish Women of Australia. And in 2010, she was added to the Victorian Honour Roll of Women. Every year, we conduct this event adjacent to Human Rights Day, observed on the 10th of December. the day the United Nations General Assembly adopted in 1948 the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This year, its theme is Recover Better, Stand Up for Human Rights. This year's Human Rights Day theme relates to COVID-19 pandemic and focuses on the need to build back better by ensuring human rights are central to the recovery effort. At National Council Victoria, human rights are very central to our mission, which is about empowering women here and in Israel, advancing their status and promoting social cohesion and human rights. Our programs and activities are focused on these objectives, from Connect, our seniors program, Caring Mums, and the JAM project and UJEB, to our various webinars that discuss and educate on issues that affect women and girls. In a few moments, we will meet two women who are both evidence of the legacy of Fanny Reading, which is now stronger than ever, and both are working tirelessly to guarantee a better future for all and make a difference. We're thrilled to have with us tonight our distinguished guest, Iris Stern Levi, who is an Israeli social activist, and like Fanny Reading, is focused on the issues of women's and human rights. Iris will share her journey and work in human rights over many years, as well as her insights. She is a co-founder of the non-profit organisation Her Academy, started in 2016, and Turning the Tables, started in 2011. Both organisations work to provide occupational training for women who are survivors of prostitution and violence. Iris Stern Levi is also on the board of the Coalition of Women for Peace, co-director of the Testimony Tribunal of Women Victims of Sexual Violence, and was the volunteer coordinator for the Tel Aviv Sexual Assault Crisis Centre for 16 years. She is the recipient of the 2018 Sussman Joint Award. Tonight's event will have Iris in conversation with our MC and our host for this evening, esteemed journalist Jodi Lee. Jodi is originally from Sydney and now lives and works in Melbourne as a reporter for 7 News Melbourne. Jodi has a keen interest in matters of gender equality and Jewish community engagement. Over the last decade, Jodi has been fortunate enough to cover some of Australia's most historic moments. In Canberra during the federal leadership spill, on the seashore as legend Mick Fanning surfed his last competitive wave, and on air covering the Burke Street massacre, moments after tragedy struck. Most recently, Jodi travelled to Israel to cover the case of the accused pedophile Malka Leifer. Please welcome Iris and Jodi.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Helen. It is such a pleasure to be here with you at the National Council of Jewish Women Victoria, and specifically to be speaking with Iris on behalf of our community here in Melbourne. I should say, though, that it won't just be myself speaking with Iris this evening. Tonight, there really is an opportunity for everybody joining us to ask questions of Iris. She told me before we went live this evening that she will answer anything, and she's happy to be as candid as she can possibly be, which is a huge, huge privilege and an honour. So you'll notice a question and answer function at the bottom of your screen. Please don't hesitate to leave a question there at any time of the evening, and I will endeavour to pass it on to Iris throughout the evening. Iris, thank you so much for being here. What a privilege. I feel like for people who might not know you, and for those who do, the best place to start with you really is at the start. How did you go from being an assertive woman yourself to using your voice to empower an entire population of women?
Wow. Hi. Thank you. First of all, thank you. And thank you everyone who's here and joining us. And thank you for the privilege. How did I start? Wow, it's a really long story. I'm Israeli born. My father, Holocaust survivor, kinder transport was sent to England. He grew up in England. He's pretty British, was. And he came to Israel after the war to meet to reunite with his family, and he met my mother, who is a black-haired, black-eyed Mizrahi Sfaradi woman, and took her to Australia. So I landed in Tasmania at the age of 3, and I think that my journey started there because I lacked an identity. My father made sure that we spoke only English, and my Jewish background, my mother's Mizrahi background, and all her culture was completely wiped out, and we assimilated into the Tasmanian culture or whatever of the early 1950s. There were no Jews there. There were no Jews. We started off in a little place called Edith Creek, moved to Launceston, down to Hobart, and there was no Jewish community. I didn't have any role model. I didn't even, if I would have known of the Fanny Reading, maybe I'd become even more of an activist even earlier. But I only had Danny Kaye and Barbara Streisand as the Jews. Anyway, so at the age of 18, they sent me to Israel so that to protect me from sex, drugs, rock and roll, or whatever. And I landed in the midst of my mother's family, which was, she had 11 sisters and 1 brother, very poor South Tel Aviv area, which I really didn't know much about because I grew up in Australia. The things that interested me were sun, Bondi Beach, or whatever. We moved to the mainland, and I came from Canberra, where we had a garden in the front, a garden in the back. I didn't even see my neighbors, and I landed in the middle of a very Mizrahi part of Tel Aviv. And suddenly, from a no one, a non-identity, I became Miss Universe. I spoke English, I'm blonde, and suddenly I was very much noticed. I had to sort of rearrange my identity. And it was traveling so many miles away from my family and from the very patriarchal sort of structure of my family. I suddenly realized what my mother had gone through and what she'd gone through being taken out of her family, her sort of sisters, where they'd sit together in the backyard and talk about puberty, childbirth or whatever, and she was isolated in Australia. And I started getting involved in feminism and the rights of the Mizrahi women in Israel. Eventually, I went on to live in Amsterdam, and when I followed the father of my children to Amsterdam, he went to work there, and I was suddenly again taken out of my identity and stuck in a different surrounding, and not having what to do. The 3 years I lived there, I became involved. That was in the 90s. I suddenly heard about the Bosnia-Herzegovina war and the atrocities that were happening to the women, especially the Serb, the Muslim Serbs. And one of the ways of occupying or one of the ways of, I'm losing my words, but most of the women in the Muslim part of Bosnia-Herzegovina were being raped and being held in mass rape camps, and they were being impregnated by the occupier, by the conqueror, and had the conqueror sort of growing inside their body. it's been counted like something from 20,000 to 50,000 women were being raped in the streets, in their houses, in front of their children, in front of their parents. Nobody heard about this. Nobody knows about this. You know, we know about the Bosnia-Herzegovina war. We know that Yugoslavia was sort of changed, etc. But nobody knows about what was happening in the 90s to all these women. And that's when I started getting really involved in activism. I came back to Israel, and I immediately went to volunteer at the Rape Crisis Center, and the rest is history.
So
in a nutshell.
In a very small nutshell, going back to your time in Amsterdam, were those women fleeing the country and coming to Amsterdam? Is that where you came in contact with the crisis? Is that where you learnt about it, or it was just through the news?
No, it wasn't in the news. I met up with a group of activists, and we were raising awareness and money mainly to help them. They needed medical care. They needed psychological care. We were sort of working, and till this day, I don't think people are aware of what happened to the women in Bosnia-Herzegovina.
That's quite incredible. And so did you feel like you were having an impact when you were working in Amsterdam, working with those women?
I don't know if I've been looking for the impact. I'm so busy. I'm an activist. I don't sit at home and work. I'm out on the streets. I'm a graffiti artist still. I do things. So I don't really stop to see if there's an impact. I just keep on going. And yeah, the smoke behind me.
How incredible. So shifting to when you moved to Tel Aviv and you started working at the Rape Crisis Center, as an Israeli, how shocking was it for you to see your fellow countrywomen coming in these kinds of circumstances?
Wow. I think that all of us as women, even though we don't say we're rape victims or victims of sexual assault, we all know the feeling of fear when we walk alone at night, or go, everyone has their little, you're going up in a lift alone with a man or whatever. So I'm aware that it exists, if it's in Australia or if it's in Israel. I think the stigma of that exists here mainly, if you say who is the offender, the rape offender, then immediately it comes to mind an Arab or a Mizrahi man with dark stubble on his chin. And yeah, you sort of learn that it's everyone. It can be everyone. And there is no sort of image of the rapist or the offender. It can be your boss, it can be your brother. And I think that the thing that really hit me was the statistics. And the statistics say that each and every one of us as women go through sexual assault during our life. It can be a catcall or whatever. It can be someone touching us. It can be rape, and it can be incest. And it says the statistics say that one out of every 5 is a rape victim, and 1 out of every 7 is an incest victim. Now this is worldwide. So let's say, okay, not 7. It's incredible. Let's say 1 out of every 10 or 1 out of every 20 is an incest victim. That means that we're sitting in a classroom with little girls who are being raped. We're sitting in a bus. We're going into the mall, into the shopping center, and we're sitting with women who've been abused, but we don't hear them. We're too embarrassed to say someone touched me or someone raped me or I'm an incest survivor. We're the ones who are embarrassed to say it. It's not the offender, So I think that the shock came when I suddenly, walked out to the street. I said, wow, that I suddenly realized that we're all survivors, but we just don't talk about it.
Where do you think that shame comes from? If it's so prolific among our community, anywhere, our global community or our closer community, where does the shame come from?
Well, we do live in a patriarchal society, even though we have come forward, you know, but still. And we're the ones who are brought up, I think it is education. We're the ones who brought up, our mothers say to us, don't go alone, don't go in the dark, don't take the shortcut. Look out, look how you wear, look what you're wearing. We always have the blame, you know. We are the one who have to look out that no one puts this rape drug in our drink. We have to protect our drinks when we go out to parties. Do not go up to his house. Don't invite him to your house. We're the ones who have to continually protect ourselves. And no one brings up the little boys and says, you know, no, it's not right to touch or take or do, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting. They say here in Australia, there's a campaign recently that said violence against women is a man's problem, not a woman's problem. And I think that idea of educating men from a young age is only very recently starting to be a part of the norm. But I'm just interested, you spent 16 years, is that right, at the Tel Aviv Rape Crisis Centre?
Working as a paid worker, I was there for 20 years.
Wow. And so where did you then transition into working with people who are hoping to come out of the sex industry?
Okay, so after 20 years, I said enough working with trauma and post-trauma. I mean, I'm doing other things as well. You know, I'm a vegan. I work for animal rights. I do. And anyway, so I said, I'm leaving. I'm going to lie down on my back, look up at the sky, watch the clouds go past, etc. And I managed to hold out for a year. And then I became aware, while working at the Rape Crisis Centre, you know, I saw that there was this hierarchy where prostitutes, women in prostitution, were at the very bottom of the ladder of being able to say, I've been raped, because, you know, you're in prostitution. What do you expect? So I started looking into what's happening in Israel, and I realized that there are very few rehabilitation centers. I'd like to talk about that as well, but after that, there's nothing. You know, there's a lot of your therapeutic work and rehabilitation, but once you're out of that, you don't really have any scope for what to do with the rest of your life. And I met one of my ex-volunteers from the Rape Crisis Centre, and she came from the fashion business, and we decided to build Turning the Tables, which is a platform for sewing and fashion design, etc., for women coming out of prostitution, which is still working. It's amazing. But once I was there for 2-3 years, I suddenly realized that there are a lot of other opportunities that we should open, and so that they have more to do. And my their then partner decided that she wanted to stay with the fashion business, so I moved on with another volunteer who's now my partner, Tal Hamawi, and we opened her academy, which is a wide variety of vocational subjects, and they can choose what interests them, and they come and they study and they go forward and they work. I just want to say, not every woman in prostitution needs us. The women that come to study are women who've never had any other option. The age to enter prostitution is between 12 to 14. So, you know, a lot of these people who say, okay, you know, she chose prostitution, you know, she should choose to go and do something else. But when you're 12 and 14, you don't have much of a choice.
I want to ask you about that. In Israel, I read that a lot of the people who are working in prostitution are olim, people who migrate to Israel, which I found quite shocking, certainly in the diaspora. And this might have been your experience growing up in Australia. We often speak of and learn about Israel through rose-colored glasses, and we learn that to be a Zionist is to, you know, believe that these kinds of things don't happen in Israel, when in reality they do. And certainly migrating to a foreign country is incredibly difficult, but it's fascinating to hear that making Aliyah to Israel can also have incredibly tough consequences for women, that they end up in prostitution.
Yeah, but it's not a large percent of women who are coming from abroad. We're talking about Israeli women. We're talking about Israeli little girls that are also, once again, I don't like to say 100%, but most of them come out of incestual, you know, households or violence or whatever. Not all of them, once again. And they're looking for this love or attention, and it's very easy to bring sort of it's a spider web, I call it, to start with very slowly get them entangled, and suddenly they find themselves in prostitution. Israeli women, Israel was one of the largest countries who were bringing in, I'm sorry, I keep on losing words.
Changing between languages is tricky.
Yeah, this is, I speak all of my, anyway, okay.
Are we talking about sex trafficking?
Sex trafficking, and we became the 3rd largest country in the world trafficking. And America said, you know, we're going to stop giving you money or whatever. And immediately we cut down on the sex trafficking. We're now talking about Israeli women. There are also a few women coming abroad that are coming abroad and finding income in sex work. And also lately, a lot of the, well, here we go. We're talking about people coming in from Eritrea and Sudan who are looking for asylum and who are being trafficked.
Wow. You mentioned an interesting word. You were talking about self-love. How important is this idea of self-esteem and love in the rehabilitation process for somebody who's known nothing other than abuse their entire life?
Yeah, I think that's the main problem. And, you know, sex work has such a bad name. And when you think of a sex worker, you think of, you know, pictures of women standing in street corners with short skirts and high boots or whatever. In Israel, it's 7% of the sex workers are the street workers. All of the rest are sort of in private apartments, brothels, hotels, strip clubs, etc. Once again, the women that I meet, the women that come to study here, are women who've never had any attention or love. Their self-esteem is minus 100, and they're referred to us from the rehabilitation centers, so they get their psychological help, etc. They come to us. We're a vocational school, but we have this system of teaching which puts a main emphasis on the fact that they're amazing lionesses or tigresses, because they've managed to come out of abuse. They've come out of drug use and alcohol, which they need, because working in the sex industry, you're seeing something like between 10 to 30 clients a day. It's unbelievable. When you think about 20 to 30 people, men, going through your body per day. They come to us while they're going through some sort of rehabilitation, but still to sit in a classroom and to believe that they're worth something, it takes a lot of work. So alongside with the teachers, we have our volunteers who are who go through a course and who are there to keep their eye on each and every student and make sure they show her how amazing she is, because she survived this. You can even call it a Holocaust, because she survived this. She's been oppressed since she was 3 years old, when someone first abused her, till we have women coming here at the age of 60. Their oldest student, who just came out of the cycle of sex work and abuse, etc., and she's been in it since she was 17. So,
wow, it's an incredibly long time to change patterns and rehabilitate somebody. So the idea is that they can follow their interests and choose a course that hopefully they'll be able to sustain a career in long term. Is that right?
They do, yeah, they do. Sometimes it takes some time. We've got, I was telling you before, we've got one woman here who's done 14 courses in 14 different subjects. But yeah, we now have 106 of our students working in.
Wow, that is incredible.
Yeah, and secretarial jobs, childcare, working in shops, sales assistants, etc.
How difficult has COVID-19 been for you as an organisation, and also for the women that you work with? I imagine being so vulnerable and having just sort of re-entered society in new roles, having to then undergo lockdown not once but a few times, would have been very challenging for them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if we can each think of ourselves during lockdown and what it means for us, and us being able to talk to our friends through Zoom or whatever. Look, a lot of isolation and confinement. The policy of confinement that we've been through has wreaked havoc. In March of 2020, we were in total lockdown, and we had women who had absolutely no way of getting their income. We had women in prostitution who suddenly they just didn't have their daily bread. They had nothing. They couldn't pay their rent. They couldn't pay their childcare, or they couldn't pay for medicine. And suddenly we had to sort of reorganize ourselves. And ever since March, because we went through lockdown, but we've been kept under very tight, strict regulations. I mean, the shops are not only opened a month ago, and a privileged person like myself, I can order online, but they don't have their Visa cards. They can't do these things. So we found ourselves paying rent for over 50 women monthly since March. We're still doing that. Providing food, clothing for their children. We went from summer to winter, and we've got women whose children have grown and they can't order clothes online, and the shops are not open. So we were buying clothes for their kids, shoes, winter shoes, whatever they needed. So suddenly, you know, we're teaching. We didn't shut down even during lockdown, but we've got the classes, but alongside we've got this huge operation of funding that's coming in to keep these women alive. And during this whole time, we were also putting women into workplaces. So we're keeping them alive and paying their rents until their first salary comes in, etc. It's been very, very stressful. I've been working day in, day night.
I can only imagine. I mean, the other thing that comes to mind in this crazy year that 2020 has been is that Israel introduced this law against the prohibition of the consumption of prostitution. Can you explain to us what that means and what effect that has had on the women that you work with? Okay.
Until December 2018, prostitution was legal, but having a brothel, selling a woman, was illegal. And in December 2019, the law came in, and it says that if you do go to a sex worker and buy sex, then you're an offender, a sex offender. Okay, and what they were supposed to do was if you caught the first time, you pay 1,200 shekel. If you caught the second time, you double it, and if you caught the third time, you have to go to a John school and work upon your addiction to sex, to go and pay for sex. Yeah.
So this is a Nordic model where the customer is penalised as opposed to the sex worker. What's your view on that arrangement? Okay,
I just want to say that nothing's happened ever since this came in. There is no, there are no policemen walking around looking for these, and nothing's happening. Plus, the biggest problem is that money has not come in from the government to help the women who are working in the prostitution industry, to help them exit. Okay. Look, I want to make it clear that I would not like to live in a society where my body can be sold for sex, right? Or my daughter or my granddaughter. But we're now living in this sort of society, and there is no help for the women in the sex industry. There is no platform. In Israel, in 2016, the welfare office of Israel did a survey, and they counted 14,000 young girls, young boys, trans women and women in the sex industry in Israel. Okay, 14,000, 2016. And since then, there have been 3 rehabilitation centers opened for women in prostitution, that they can hold up to 30 women, right? So out of the 14,000, we have 90 women who can go through some sort of transformation and come out of the sex work. That's it. No money's come in. There's no welfare. They're all in debt. They're all suffering some sort of abuse, some sort of trauma. They're all going through cold turkey from drugs, from alcohol that they need to be able to go out every night or every day, every morning, and go through 30 men.
So you receive no government funding?
No.
Wow. And so you rely solely on, I imagine, donations. Is that from within Israel or through the diaspora as well?
Mainly abroad, yeah.
Wow. Do you think they haven't been patrolling this new law because of COVID-19, or do you think it was sort of an afterthought?
No, the law came in December 2019.
And do you think that they will enforce it?
Well, if you're following Israeli politics, we're always on the verge of where our government keeps on falling down or having to go through votes again, and so nothing's stable here. So I don't know, we keep on changing the people that are working in the government, keep on changing, we keep on getting new ministers and who are making different laws and bringing in different, so, and women's issues are always on the bottom of the list, so.
The question of decriminalisation of prostitution is a really interesting one. You mentioned that you work with so many women who didn't choose this life, but there is a school of thought. There are some sex workers who feel empowered by what they do and who say they do choose to do it and would like to be able to do it legally. Do you have any sort of sway either way on that issue? Where do you stand on decriminalisation?
Look, I think that I cannot decide for anyone, any group of women who I'm not part of, or I didn't grow up I'm not working in the sex industry. I can't decide what is good for her and what is not good for her without hearing her voice. So I think that first of all, we have to listen to what they say, you know, and we can't decide if what she's saying is right or wrong because we're not in there. And I do think that, you know, this isolation of the women who are working in the sex industry, and and denying their rights, like suddenly cutting off their only income without laying down any groundwork for them to come out if they want to. And part of the survey says that 79% of the women in the sex industry said they'd get out if they had any opportunity, right? There are no opportunities. There are no vocational schools. There are no vocational schools. There are no extra rehabilitation centres. We don't have them coming into the government, into Parliament, saying what they think is right for them. So I can't really decide if they're right or wrong, right? I can only say, let's listen to them and let them be part of the decision making with us, and then we work it out. I'm an NGO, right? So I have a board of directors. We've got 7 women in our board of directors, and 3 of them are our students. And so, like when the law came out, one of them said that she was for the law, and 2 of them said we're against the law because our sisters are inside the brothels and they're struggling to survive. So let's leave their income until they have some sort of solid land that they can stand on.
Give them the option is what I hear you say.
Yeah.
There's a question that's come through. How do you feel Australia and Israel compare on the topics of prostitution and sex trafficking? Is this as much a problem here in Australia that we just aren't aware of?
No. Look, I lived in Sydney for a few years, but, you know, I was told to keep away from King's Cross. I was a schoolgirl then, yeah? But look, I think we're all aware of the women in the sex industry around us, right? But we don't go out and look for them. That's why I was so honored, you know, to be invited to talk on the Fanny Reading occasion, because here was a woman who said, wait a second, I see these women as people. You know, they're amazing if you stop to talk to them, not as a privileged person who comes down to say, oh, you know, I'd like to hear all about you, what you're doing, but if you come down as a sister to sister, then you find these amazing people who really, I'm telling you, that to see the strength in each and every woman, see the amazing ladder she's been climbing just to stay alive and stay in prostitution.
Before you can empathize with somebody and get to know them, you need to be able to identify a person in crisis. Is there a way to do that? Are there any sort of things that we as listeners can be looking out for in people that we meet each day, both men and women and children as well, that could identify them as being in trouble?
I think it's the identifying the children first of all, because as I said, 1 out of every 7 is an incest survivor, right? It doesn't mean that the father raped her. It can also be an uncle bumping her up and down on his lap, right? And her feeling something's wrong and it's their secret. We can see those children in our kindergartens and in our school rooms. We see them. They're the ones who are asking for attention by being the very quiet ones, or by being the very rowdy ones, or the very open and outgoing ones, or whatever. They're there and they give the signs. They show that they're there, right? We had one woman who said that she continually sat at the very edge of her chair in school, and she hoped that the teacher would see that there was something wrong with her. But nobody noticed, you know, she was told to sit straight. Nobody stopped and said, is there a problem? Is there a problem why you're sitting on the edge of your chair? You know, we immediately straighten up our children and tell them to behave properly, to cross our legs. I mean, I don't know how many women are in the audience, but we're probably all sitting with our legs crossed, whereas the men are always sitting with their legs completely open, you know? So what is this, you know, we're always being put together and made to minimalize ourselves. And if we do become rowdy or whatever, we're told to be quiet and behave. We have to stop and say, wait a second. You want to say something? Something bothering you? You want to tell me something? Because I'm here and I'll listen to you. And if you don't want to tell me today, I'll be here tomorrow, you know, to offer them. Because we don't speak. We do not speak.
It's a really valid point. There's a question here about what advice would you give mothers who are raising young daughters, or fathers or caregivers who are raising young women and actually young boys, which goes to the point that we were speaking about before. Is it about speaking to the girls and encouraging them to speak up, or is it about saying to young boys that we're equal from a really young age?
It's both. It's both. I'd like to put an emphasis on the boys as well, but I just want to say that as mothers, you know, a lot of people say to me, wow, but look at the women in Egypt. They mutilize their daughters, and look at the women in Japan. They put their daughters in tiny feet, they break their feet. And I say, look, let's look at ourselves first. You know, the minute our daughters are born, we're going to put a little ribbon here, and so that she's cute and she's sweet and how beautiful. And we talk about her clothes and her hair and her eyes. The little boy, we say, oh wow, look at him, he's going to be a football player. Wow, look at this little kid. You know, when my son was born, everyone sort of looked into the pram and said, oh, what a soldier he's going to be. You know, and I said, whoa, you know, let the kid grow up first. But I think it's stopping this sweet little girl opposed to this, you know, little boy that climbs up and runs, and wow, look at him, he's a real boisterous little kid. I think we should bring up our boys as well as our girls to be feeling and loving, and not be a man or be a little lady. Let them both grow up and let their voices be heard, and to stop telling our little girls to be good little girls, and boys will be boys when they're not good little boys. We limit our daughters. We put on their little skirts, their little dresses. They can't climb up they do, but they can't climb up the ladder to go down the slide because the boys are going to see their panties. You know, we limit them all the time with our clothing, with the way we address them. And I think we have to open our eyes and stop with this pink blue business. You know, it's not the pink blue. It's like, yeah.
How much I should say to our audience as well, if you do have questions for Iris, now is a great time to submit them. You'll notice the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We already have so many flooding in, and one of them is about the breakdown of secular versus religious, the backgrounds of the women who you worked with both at the Rape Crisis Centre and also now at her academy. What is that breakdown? How many of them are coming from ultra-Orthodox backgrounds, and how much do you think that religion contributes, certainly in Israel, to these gender stereotypes?
I think there's gender stereotypes all over. And we always look for the extreme so that we can separate ourselves from them. And yes, we've had also in the Rape Crisis Centre, and also now working with the ex-sex workers. We have our women coming in that have come from a Hasidic or religious background. I don't know statistics. They exist. And also, I'm sure there are more in every background. It's just we do not speak up. We do not speak up, women. We do not speak up. We do not say, you know, I was abused. We are embarrassed to say I was abused, whereas the abuser should be the one who's embarrassed. You know?
It's a very good point. We touched on that earlier. There's another question. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing young women in Israel today?
Okay. Wow. Look, we're a very militaristic society. Very, very, very. The minute my son was born, he was a soldier. The minute my daughter was born, she was going to be a soldier too. Okay. that's what's expected of you, and that's what you're brought up like that. And on Purim, you get dressed up in your policeman or your soldier uniform, etc. What was the question?
What is the largest issue facing young women in Israel today, in your view?
Right. Okay. So now look, we are an advanced society, 2020, etc. And I think that the top of her dreams is to be in the Air Force or some sort of general or whatever in the army. And I don't see that as feminism. I don't see becoming something high up in the army as meaning that you've sort of broken the glass ceiling, especially because after women and men come out of the army, the men do continue their experience in the army allows them to enter politics, into businesses. They all have. You'll see that all the politicians have been generals in the past, etc. And women who've also climbed high in the rank, it doesn't service them at all. We're still a very, very patriarchal society here. And yeah, it's very difficult. Even if we're working as we're doctors or we're CEOs of the high techs or whatever, and you're 30 and you go to your cousin's wedding and you're not married, you know, that you're a failure. You're a failure.
I have to ask you then, if feminism is not being able to do anything a man can do at the same or greater level, in your view, what is feminism?
It's seeing the value in who you are. I mean, we always have to be like the men. Why do I have to be like him? You know, I'm amazing as I am. So, you know, accept who I am and what I have to bring as being good. I don't want to always have to be, I don't want this to be equal. I don't want to be in the army. I don't want to fight. I don't want to have the guns and shoot. You know, I want to be amazing as whoever I am. So that's my feminism anyway.
So it's easy to understand why that would be of benefit to us as women, but why are women's rights so important to us as a global community, to men, to women, to people who don't identify as either? Why is it so important that women are empowered?
Well, that's an hour-long discussion. Quickly,
in 2 minutes.
Okay. I just say that yesterday we have a course here that's a digital graphic course, okay? And they started working on fonts and lettering. And the teacher said that, you know, that it all started from the caveman, who drew pictures on the caves, and that was the first lettering, the first communication through symbols. So let's go back to there, where the cavemen were the ones who were the amazing, you know, we had to become a caveman, one of these men that walked around with the spears and knocked out mammoths, etc., to be worth something, even though they did it once a month, because you can live off a mammoth meat for a month, whereas the women were digging for seeds and for grubs and carrying water on their head and the child on the back and the child in the front, and nobody saw that as anything as being amazing, you know. But he was walking off beating his chest with his arrow, and that was like wow. So we've been brought up on this, and then whatever followed.
Correct. Well, Renata has
to realize that, you know, we're amazing as we are, you know, and coming to today where you can be a CEO and you're still running home to do the laundry, do the cooking, arrange the carpool for the children, arrange who's going to, what sandwiches for what, you know. And yes, we do have fathers who help and who do things, yes, and they're amazing, and I'm not putting them down or anything, you know, but it's the majority of women are still balancing work and, like, you know, with the COVID and everything, they're the ones who lost their jobs. They're the ones who stayed at home, whereas the men's jobs were very important, and they're the ones who had to go and continue.
Yeah,
In the
Renata
lockdowns,
has an interesting question on this. What education are boys and men getting to understand what's happening? And what education are parents in Israel receiving about this gender inequality and how to deal with it?
Not a lot. Not a lot. I mean, what education are they getting in Australia? Is it coming in like in kindergarten? There's a research on how kindergarten teachers talk to their children, right? You Google it. I can't remember. Maybe it's in Hebrew, but still, they did a research, and they found that automatically the kindergarten teachers automatically sort of guide the boys towards the blocks, the building blocks, and the girls to the play, the imaginary play game. But you know, I don't think that in the curriculum of learning how to be a kindergarten teacher, you're learning about gender roles or how to break the gender roles. You don't learn that, you know. Wow,
it's incredible. To answer your question, I don't think parents here, and I'm not a parent, but I don't think parents here, and certainly teachers here, are not covering that. There is a question here from Margaret, just going back to this idea of Johns who seek prostitution services in Israel receiving a fine. She would like to know, by criminalising the offender visiting a brothel, do you believe that that will cause more violence toward prostitutes in Israel? And what do you see as the best solution?
No, I think decriminalising. I think there have to be laws against exploitation of women, about violence towards women, about or trafficking. There has to be laws about this. But I think that before you start criminalizing, legalizing, whatever, I think we really have to hear what they have to say. And there are all sorts of organizations. There's also an organization in Israel called Al-Gaman. It's a dark red color. Where ever since COVID, they've gotten together and they're saying, we want to be heard. Nobody's giving them the space to be heard, but they're saying we want to be heard. And they're getting together and they're saying, you know, if you're saying that a client can't come to us, then we can't sit in our brothels, so you're isolating us because we have to go to his house now just so that we can get money to pay our rent, and we're in more danger. So I think before we talk about anything in any country, we have to allow the women who are in the industry, who are doing the work, we have to allow them to talk and to be prepared to hear a wide spectrum of ideas, and not to be afraid of it, because it exists and it still exists and keeps on happening. So let's stop and say, wait, let's hear what they have to say. Let's see what they want, you know?
Give them a voice. Just on that, there's a question here from Sheila. Sheila says, supporters of one local organisation that has pioneered these kinds of programs that we described here in Victoria, Project Respect it's called, has experienced aggressive protests outside their meetings and public events on trafficking from members of the Australian Sex Workers Alliance. Do you face that kind of backlash in Israel with your work?
No, because I don't voice my opinions. I'm here to give an opportunity to whoever wants to come and study a vocation and to continue. I don't go out and say it's good, it's bad. I'm not. That's not what's worrying me. What's worrying me is that there are no platforms. I don't think there are any in Australia as well. That say, you know, you want to come out? I'm here. Come out.
So you see a role as more of a facilitator, giving these people a voice and a platform, as opposed to standing up and campaigning for what you personally believe to be right.
Yeah.
How incredible. There is one more question here. It is about your reaction. I don't know if you're familiar with the Malka Leifer case.
Yes, of course, sure.
Yes, and how do you what do you know of that, and how do you feel? How do you feel about the Israeli reaction to that case?
Well, people were horrified here, but then also you had a villain who didn't look like your brother. Okay, so of course it's horrifying, and wow, these amazing women who are standing up and talking, and they're talking without these pixels or the back of their heads or whatever. I think it's amazing, and I think this terrible slowdown that the Israeli government put on having her go to Australia and not, and looking out after Malka Leifer, which was terrible, but then that's our government.
Yeah, it has been quite terrible, but hopefully will come to an end. I've also noticed that our time is fast running out. So I do have one final question for you. If you could share with us, what could we as Australians, as ordinary citizens, is there anything in your mind that we could each do in our own lives to help promote the rights of everybody, including women?
Well, change your way of thinking. Like me being someone, not like growing up as a Jew in Tasmania and then afterwards in Australia, also in the 50s, there wasn't a Jewish community. So I was looked upon as someone strange. I went to school, I became the best in the Bible contest so that they wouldn't think that I was different because I was Jewish, And I see the women in prostitution, as being me against the rest of society. She's one of the rounds, as being a feminist organization, we have rounds before every we start the class. And one of the rounds is, what did you dream of when you were a little girl? What did you dream of being? And we had women who wanted to be explorers and to go up to the moon and to discover, to be scientists. They had all these amazing dreams that were cut down somewhere. And we have to see them not as pests or something that they're I don't know, vilifying our society or whatever, but as human beings who are surviving, and to understand that and to have a bit more compassion, not and say, oh, they're all drunks and druggies. They're not. They're doing that to keep on surviving. It's not something that they're dreaming of. It's not something that they wanted to do when they were little girls. And to talk to our boys. And it's not right to see a woman as a sexual object. But we also have to realize that we're bringing up our daughters sometimes as sexual objects. The minute we start, with the taking, like shaving all our hair off, push-up bras, minis, whatever, then the boys expect this. I'm not saying walk around with the polo necks or whatever. I'm just saying, we all have to think about what we're saying to our children.
It's so incredible. If there's one thing that I've really gained from this conversation is just this idea of stopping to think, stopping to talk to somebody, to better understand them, to show them empathy, and not to immediately jump to preconceived ideas or stereotypes that we might have picked up along the way. Iris, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy morning. I've noticed all your students kind of walking in the background, so I know how busy you really are. We so appreciate you being here. You have an incredible legacy of work, both behind you and ahead of you, no doubt. And it's been a pleasure to learn from you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Jodi, and thank you so much, Iris. What an eye-opener. I mean, it's to actually repeat what Jodi just said. We really need to stop and think. Stereotypes are everywhere, and you have to kind of look past those stereotypes. So much of this is relevant for us in our everyday lives. The exploitation of women, the trafficking of women, and more than anything, the violence against women. And I think, you know, from what it's been an absolute eye-opener, Iris, just hearing about how you've come about to become one of those 3 organisations in Israel that are actually supporting these women who are largely doing what they're doing as a result of violence, extreme violence that's occurred in their lifetimes. And that is something that we are only just at the tip of the iceberg, especially in this state, with the Royal Commission, with all the work that's being done around domestic and family violence. It's just the very, very, very beginning. And there's so much education that still needs to come. But thank you, everyone, so much for joining us tonight for the 2020 Fanny Reading Human Rights Lecture. And how incredible has it been? If you don't already, please do follow us on our socials. National Council Victoria is on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn and Instagram. Please feel free to jump on to our website now to comment or join the conversation. We look forward to seeing you again online and again in person soon. Thank you.